Okay. All right, so the first thing we're going to do, and I'll pull up my lesson plan real quick. Okay, is we're going to talk about ES6. So ES6 stands for ECMAScript 6, and so here's a website that kind of displays it. I like, if you go to Babel.js, babel.js.io, it's a compiler for your JavaScript. So something that you're going to discover is one of the issues with client-side web development is that there are a lot of different browsers that are rolled out by different companies, and these browsers all they all do different things, or they implement things a little bit differently. They have their own code bases, and so you'll have compatibility issues sometimes. And so maybe Chrome is going to roll out some of these ES6 features faster than Safari. Maybe Firefox is going to do things a little bit differently than Chrome implements them. And so you'll have slight differences in the way that things are done. And most of that you'll see is with HTML, the way HTML and CSS, the approach there. But we're not even going to talk about Internet Explorer. They've been the black sheep. The new browser there, Edge, the Microsoft Edge, I think is what it's called, is good, and they've turned a corner, and they're doing a lot of good things there. And Edge is going to be updating in the way that all the other browsers are updating. So should be a thing of the past, but Internet Explorer, they had all these incremented versions, and so you'd have to try to support the different versions. And then everyone had Windows, and so Internet Explorer is used everywhere. But then if you buy Windows at a different time, then you'll have a different version of Internet Explorer, and so then you'll have all these crazy compatibility issues. But we'll go into more specifics of that stuff later. But so this thing called Babel, what it does is it takes your ES6 code and then it compiles it down into ES5. So ECMAScript 5, that's the JavaScript code that you're used to in the JavaScript mini bootcamp. So the mini bootcamp that we did, everything was done in ES5. So that's kind of a var keyword, and just like the standard JavaScript that you've been practicing, that's ES5. Today we're going to go over some different ES6 features. Everything that you're writing in the course, any JavaScript written in the course from now on is going to be done in ES6. And so it's JavaScript, but there's just a couple little changes to it, little shortcuts, and convenience. Like it makes the language more convenient, makes it easier to write in. We're going to be writing, a lot of the code that you're writing now is going to be done within a Node environment. And so, it's all done in Node right now, which means, so Node is a JavaScript runtime. It's a C++ application that's running on your computer. It's outside of the browser. They took the Chrome V8 engine, it's the C++ code in the Chrome browser that runs your JavaScript code. And so anyway, it's like they ripped that out, added some different things onto it, and then we're running that outside of the browser. So that's what Node is. It's and again, we're going to go pretty in depth into that later. So again, this is just very high level. So Node, they took the Chrome engine out. The V8 engine is what it's called. Ripped that out, added a bunch of different features, extended to it, and then we're running that outside of a browser. And so that's going to run our code. So a lot of this ES6 stuff is already built in as features within Node. It depends on the version. Different features are added in different versions. But if you've all installed Node within the last 6 months or a year, then you should be fine, and you should have all these different ES6 features supported in there. If you're running things and you're getting errors there, I'll help you out, but it's probably just because we need to get you onto a more recent version of Node. So we don't have to compile it. If we were running ES6 in the browser, a lot of the features have to be compiled. What that means is that they take the ES6 code and then they translate it into ES5 code, and the ES5 code is what actually runs in the browser. So you write ES6, the compiler turns it into ES5, and then the ES5 runs in the browser. So so that's what will be happening once we get to actual client-side development. Right now, all the advanced JavaScript stuff we're doing, and then the data structures and algorithm stuff that we'll be doing, that we'll be getting into after this, all of that is existing outside of the browser using the Node runtime. So lots of vocabulary that I kind of peppered at you. Feel free to ask questions in the Slack channel, and I'm happy to elaborate on it. But I'm intentionally going pretty fast here because, again, the main takeaway from this is just kind of the high-level concept, and we'll be revisiting this in the future. Okay, so Babel has a good reference, and it is showing this as a, like I'm on a tablet for some reason. Okay, so let me refresh this real quick. Nope, okay, all right, it's gonna think I'm on a tablet. Okay, so if we go to the docs, well, no, that's for Learn ES 2015. Okay, 1 second, let me, I don't like the way they're doing their ES, or their responsive design. They were detecting in my browsers. We'll get into that too. Like it's where you set up your web page to, it changes and morphs depending on the viewport size. So their website's a little funny. I kept thinking I was on a tablet, so it was condensing all the menus and everything. So, okay. So on this Learn ES 2015, so ES 2015 is the same thing as ES6. It's kind of, you'll see those terms used differently, but I just posted the link in the Slack channel. But if you come through, it gives you a little description of the different features, the different things that have been added. And then it's kind of cool. You can type in ES5 code and it will translate it to ES6, or you can type in ES6 and it translates it to ES5. So you can kind of see how they relate to each other. A lot of the things are just, they call it syntactic sugar. So it's not it's not like this new feature really that's implemented in the language. It's just a new way of writing it, and then it's kind of like superficial, but then like underneath it's still using the old ES5 way of doing it. So they call that syntactic sugar. And again, I'll break that down for you more in a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to cover a couple of the key differences. So the funny looking functions that you saw in here as I was talking about this file, there's no function keyword anywhere. You see this const word that's being used. We're going to talk about those right now. So I'm going to be doing a lot of my coding in this thing called JSBin, and I'm going to shrink my window size now. Okay. So I'll be doing a lot of this in here. This is a nice little playground. It's a little scratch pad. You can pull it up and write some code in it. And anyway, yeah, it's a thing that I'm constantly doing with the language is, if I want to better understand something, or I want to better understand a method or something like that on an array or things like that, I'll just come into either JSBin or the Chrome console. You can pop it up, type it out in here. Some pretty simple ways to kind of test out the code. So you'll probably constantly be doing this to try to remember different methods or check behavior of different aspects of the language. So I would recommend that all of you use Google Chrome. So I'd recommend that you download Google Chrome and use that. Firefox is really good too, but I'd say don't use Safari, don't use Internet Explorer for web development. So most people use Firefox or Chrome, and I would say that most of that group use Chrome over Firefox, but I don't have hard data to back that up. That may just be my experience, but Chrome is great. Yeah, the developer tools and everything are really sharp. And I will be doing everything in Chrome as well. So if you do Chrome, you'll have the added benefit of seeing me using hotkeys and things like that. And then anyway, you'll be more familiar with the interface based off of the way that I interact with it. So I'd recommend Chrome, but if for whatever reason you want to use Firefox, use whatever. But again, I would suggest staying away from Internet Explorer and Safari and Opera. So okay. All right, so let's look at arrow functions. Okay, so in ES5, we had two different ways that we could define functions. We could write them as this way, which is called a function declaration. So we use the function keyword. We give it a name. We have parentheses here to allow us to specify the parameters. So if we had x and y. So if this was multiply, and then we pass in x and y, and we invoke it like this. And then inside of this function, we'll say return x times y. And so the way this gets evaluated is it takes x and y, it multiplies them down to a value, and then it goes and returns it. And so multiply, we then say var product is equal to multiply 5 and 5. Okay, so then we can go console.log, product, run that, and we see 25 is printed to the console. All right, so yeah, so this is pretty standard. This is what you're used to. Again, a function, it takes in input, you do work on it, and then you return an output. So in JavaScript, functions don't have to return things. You don't have to. I mean, if a function was just going to do something like if it was going to actually log out x times y, then it'll just do that. We'll see that nothing breaks. So in some languages, you have to specifically define that the function is not going to return anything, or you have to specify the types of the values that are coming in for the parameters. JavaScript is pretty loose. It's a pretty high abstraction, so we don't have to do a lot of that. We'll be getting into, later in the course, we'll be getting into languages and stuff where you have to be very careful with types and things like that. But JavaScript is pretty loose at first, and so that's why I think it's a great language actually to first get started with. So we kind of take a different approach. Some schools, they start kind of like first principles really low and work their way up. We do a little bit of a mix, but I like to start top down, get you actually building things, get a foundation, and then we can go deeper and deeper, and then you'll better understand the concepts as we go lower. So, okay, so this is this ES5 way of writing it with a function declaration. Here's how you would do it with a function expression. Let me know if I do any typos. So this one right here, function expression. So we call it an expression because there's an equal sign in there. We're making an assignment. So we're declaring a variable, and then we assign an anonymous function to it. So this block that's highlighted is almost identical to this block. I mean, the contents, I haven't put in the contents yet, but it's almost identical. There's two differences. One is we don't have a word here. So we could multiply. So this right here is valid as well. And so you're saying function multiply, and you're assigning it to the variable multiply. But often when you're seeing it, when you see a function declaration like this, it's often when a function expression like this, it's using an anonymous function. That means it doesn't have a name. This function has a name. This one does not have a name. And then because we're using an equal sign and making an assignment, because it's an expression, we put a semicolon on the end. Semicolons go at the end of every expression. So an expression is when you're doing some kind of operation like this, or at the end of a return statement, or when there's an equals sign involved. We don't put semicolons at the end of the statements. We don't put semicolons at the end of for loops. They just go at the end of an expression. So, okay, so we have a function expression, function declaration. We're using a semicolon on this one because we have an equal sign. It's an expression. Okay, so anyway, this is the ES5 way of doing this. This still works. It's totally valid, but we're going to be, you're going to be writing your functions differently in this class. So the way that we're going to have you write your functions, and I'm going to turn this to ES6 Babel, is you're going to use what's called an arrow function, and this is what it's going to look like. So I'll revisit const in just a moment. We're going to have const multiply is equal to this anonymous arrow function. So this is the syntax for an arrow function. It's it's shorter. It behaves a little bit differently when we get into like putting methods on objects and things like that, and then there's some other different shortcuts and things that are associated with it. But pretty much it's just a shorter, more condensed way to write your functions and cuts down on how much you have to write. So this is how we're going to be defining functions in this class. So just by default, if you're making just a plain function, we're going to say const multiply, so set the variable, do an equal sign, and then you're going to set up an arrow function like this. So we have parentheses, which are where we just define the parameters, and then you have this arrow, So equal sign and then the greater than sign, which is the replacement for this function keyword. And then you have your brackets, just like you do in these other functions, where you define the body of the function. Okay. So I'm going to remove these other ones right here. So okay, so you have our product, and then we'll run this, and we'll see that 25 is printed out. So that works. Okay, so all right. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about const and let. All right, so in ES6, we don't use var anymore. Like, it still works, but I don't want you guys to use the var keyword anymore. You're going to always use const unless you can't use it, then use let, and I'll explain why you potentially couldn't use it. So const, when you define a variable that's a const, so constant, it means that we are not going to reassign anything to this variable. So right here, so you can see here I switched stuff to const, it still works. If I tried to do this, so like let's say we log out product, and then let's say I wanted to run it again and overwrite the variable, multiply, and then I said 10 and 5. We run that, and it's going to print out an error, and it's not showing up in there, but let's see, product. Let's see, sometimes JSPin is not the best. Let me just refresh this real quick. It's being kind of funny. All right, let's go to JS Fiddle. Okay. All right, so JS Fiddle does a similar thing. JSPin, I just like it sometimes because it has those like vertical columns. But okay, so inside of here, we have our const, multiply, arrow function, 2 parameters, x and y, return x times y, and then we assign the product. Okay, so now if we come down here and try to do the exact same thing again, then we run it, pop open our console down here, and you'll see an error right here. Let me get it says uncaught syntax error, identifier product has already been declared. And so we're trying to declare a new variable that has the same name. So it's going to block that. If I just try to assign to the variable, then it's going to say assignment to constant variable. And so we cannot reassign it. So in this instance, if it's a variable that we want to be reassigning, then we're going to use the let keyword. So let means that we can reassign it, and you'll see that it works fine. And so if I wanted to print it out again, see 25 and 50 are printed out. So, all right. So we have this, yeah, so we have const and let. Const is a variable that you cannot reassign it. Let you can reassign. So let is essentially behaving like kind of like var was before. So let is like your new var, and then const is yeah, different. So again, so just like the rule to remember, always use const. If you can't use const because you have to reassign it, then use let. So just default to using const. Another time where you're going to use let would be if you're looping over an array. You know, so like let's say I define an array up here. I'll say const nums is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 4. So again, I'm using const here on the array because I'm not going to be reassigning this variable or changing it. And then let's now iterate over nums.length. Okay. Let me, okay. So all right. So right here, this is how we're iterating over an array. You know, I starts at 0, and then we'll do nums at index I. Okay, so this is going to print out all the code into the console. So 1, 2, 3, 4 prints out all the items in turn. So if we try to do a const here, throw an error, so you can't do that. But yeah. So let, that's generally where you're going to be using a let. If you have some kind of counter or thing you're incrementing, otherwise it's just going to be const used everywhere. Creating a global variable in Java. So it's actually a little different. And so So constant let, so this is the next aspect of constant let that we're going to get into, is that they actually, they have this idea of lexical scope. So with the var keyword in JavaScript, so if I have function foo, and then var x is equal to 5, if I try to console.log x right here, it can't see into the function, and so it's not going to run. So now this idea of scope. So x is defined inside of this scope. It's in there. It's contained in that block. We can't see out. But if instead of a function, if it was just like if, I'm just saying true, but if true, then let's say like var x is equal to 5. So if we try to access this x, we can see in there. We can see into the if statement. So if I run this, 5 gets printed out, so that works. So the thing is, though, if I were to change this to a const and run that, then we have this error, x is not defined. So that's the other major difference between like const and let and var. Const and let will be blocked. Their scope also includes if statements and for loops. So if you have a for loop or a while loop, do while loop, if statement, a const and let will be restricted to within those blocks. Whereas a var is only to the function. And so const and let have a little more of a restricted like way they behave with scope and variables. And so it's yeah, and so this is also seen as a benefit, just because it keeps things a little more modular, keeps things cleaner. So yeah, yeah, those are just some minor differences. So const and let, arrow functions, you're going to be using these just right off the bat. Okay, all right, so I want to go back and revisit that multiplication example. So again, if I have function multiply x and y defined like this, and then return x times y. So if I were to again write this in the ES6 way, I'm going to say const multiply is equal to arrow function like that, put a semicolon because we have an expression with an equal sign, and then it's going to take in x and y. Okay, so then return x times y. So we can do this is just kind of the basic way of doing it. But then if you have a function where you're just returning or you just have a single line, because right now in this function we're just returning x and y, that's all we're doing. And so we can actually shorten that to this. And so what it's going to do is it's going to implicitly add in a return statement, and then it's going to evaluate this and then return it. Okay, so that's another thing that you'll see that kind of throws people off when they're seeing stuff with these yeah, ES6 functions. So okay, all right, so another major thing to go over, and we'll be covering this, like this keyword in more detail later, but this is not present inside of an arrow function. So an arrow function will not have a this bound inside of it. So you will not be able to, so when we get into bind, call, and apply, which I'll talk about later, or methods on objects or as constructors, it doesn't work. And so you have to use the function keyword. And so that's when you'd use that. So, but again, default to using an arrow function, if you're needing to do something with this keyword, then use a function. The function keyword, use this style. So again, very similar to like with const and let, use const by default, and then use let if you have to. Use these arrow functions by default, and then if you have to, use the function keyword. And one of the benefits to that is you're not it allows you to be very very explicit about when you're using this keyword. It anyway improves readability, and as you get used to this style, the code is cleaner. It cuts down on a lot of the code that you have to write. Okay, so with all the teaching I've done, so something else about my background, I was a lead instructor at another code boot camp for a couple years. I've done a lot of teaching, you know, and done a lot of teaching like with work, you know, teaching other developers and stuff like that. And so something I've realized is that I can talk and talk and talk at you guys, and it's some of it will stick, some of it won't. When it's really going to stick is when you actually get in and start writing the code. So anyway, so I've been talking for a while. So I'm just going to go over one more concept, and then we're going to turn you loose with the homework. There's some stuff in there that we have not covered yet, but we'll go in and we'll do some mini lectures throughout the day today to cover the different concepts that will be in the homework. But if I try to dump it all on you guys right now, it's not going to sink in. So, all right, let's go and check questions. Okay. All right. So we're going to go over closure we'll go over that later. We're going to go over callback functions right now. Okay. So in JavaScript, let me clean this up. Yep, JS Fiddle is on my app block. Okay. So right now, yeah, okay. So in JavaScript, let me pull something up real quick. Okay, so the term is first-class citizen. So in JavaScript, functions are what you call a first-class citizen. What that means is that functions can be assigned to variables, they can be put inside of arrays, they can be put on objects, they can be passed into functions, they can be returned from functions. You can, a function in JavaScript, you can treat it like you would any other value. Not to confuse you, but in actuality, they're callable objects. Everything in JavaScript is an object. And so because of that, functions can be passed and moved around and used in a very, very flexible way, which leads to some very powerful design patterns. And so one of these design patterns in JavaScript is, well, this idea of using a callback function. A callback function is just a function that you've passed as an argument into another function. That's all it is. So let me show you what that looks like. So I have a function like this, function foo. I'm going to write these now in ES6 syntax. All right, so I have foo, and then we have bar. Okay, so I have two different functions. I don't know, it's kind of a funny convention, but like foo, bar, baz, or whatever, like are just like, I don't know, you see that like pop up in tutorials and stuff a bunch for just like random functions. But okay, so all right, so you have this function foo, and we have this function bar. All right, so now what we're gonna do is we can pass in a function into another function. And so often it's referenced as CB, which stands for callback. So foo right here is going to take in a function as an argument. So now what we're going to do is we're going to, let me try JSPin again. Just because you have these panels are a lot easier to read. Guys' perspective. Okay. All right, so we have foo, which is going to take in a callback function, and then it can invoke it inside of here. All right, so now our bar is just a function, nothing special about it. And we're going to say console.log hi. Now we're going to come down here. We're going to say foo. So we're going to call it. So again, foo, we reference the function, and then we use parentheses to invoke it or call it. It's like the same thing. So we're going to invoke the function, and then we're going to pass in our function in a non-invoked state. So it's important to remember. So right here we have foo. This is a reference to the actual function, like the block of code in its uncalled state, like the set of instructions. It's this is the function. This right here is the evaluated function. So it's whatever is returned from the function. So in this instance, it's undefined because nothing's getting returned from the function. But so it's important to understand this distinction that this is the function, this is the function that's called, and this will be evaluated at the time the program reaches it. This right here, nothing's going to happen. But this right here is actually going to call the function. Okay, so all right, so we're going to call the foo function, and then we're going to pass in bar as the first argument. So we pass in bar, so foo is called, and then CB, the parameter, this is like a variable name for whatever we're passing in here, and then CB is going to reference bar and print that out. So we'll run this. I'll walk through another example in a moment, but we see that hi is printed to the console. So this is the way the execution works. I'm going to be doing a lot of this with you guys because it's important to start to think how the execution is handled, what order everything's going in. So we start out first, we define a variable const foo, and then it's actually going to go down and then define const bar. They get hoisted up to the top of their scope, but we'll talk about that later. And it reaches the bottom, and then it comes back up to the top, and now it's going to run everything. So then it's going to go in, and it's going to find foo, and it's going to assign it this function. So it assigns foo, the arrow function. Then it comes down, finds bar, it assigns bar to this function. It comes down, it says, okay, foo. It's like, all right, so I have a reference for foo. Where is foo? So it goes back up, finds the foo variable, and looks to see what it's equal to. And so foo has been assigned to this function. So then foo is this function up here, which is purple, and it's going to call it. And then it's going to take this, so bar, so it sees another variable, so it's going to go back up, find the variable. It's going to say, what are you? It says, I'm a function. And so then it takes this function that's all in purple and passes that in as bar into this function. So CB is a variable name that is referring to this function at the time that foo is run. So CB is this function. And we come that in, and then we call it. Exactly the same as if we had just done bar like this. So you can see we run it here. The function is called twice. We call it bar here, and then we pass bar into foo, and there's no parentheses. It's just the function because it's not the invoked, like it's not the result of calling it, but we're passing the actual function into foo, and then we call it like this later. We could do another one. So we can say const baz. This function is going to say const.log sep. All right. And down here, we do the same thing. We say foo, and then pass in baz to it like that. Clear that, run it, we'll see hi sep. So these functions, baz and bar, have both been passed into foo, and then foo executes and calls that function. So this is the idea of a callback function. This is something that we'll be going over a lot. You'll see lots and lots and lots of callback functions in JavaScript. When we get into like front-end frameworks, use them all the time. When we get into Node, you'll be using these everywhere. So yeah, this idea of a callback function. So functions in JavaScript can be passed around just like any other value. They're being passed into these functions to invoke it. Okay, yeah, so the return, so there is an implicit return that is always added. If I don't type in return, then it's gonna go return undefined, and it's gonna return the undefined value in JavaScript. Yeah, good question. So yeah, so in some languages, yeah, it's all gonna break. If you don't, or you have to say like void. You have to put like a keyword that says void, like this function is not going to return anything. But all functions in JavaScript, they will implicitly return undefined if you do not specifically, explicitly return a value. Okay. All right, so we've covered const, let, arrow functions. We've covered callback functions. Okay, so all right. So the reason we're covering callback functions is because in your homework, let's see, rewrite it as one line as well. Oh yeah, so let me show you what that looks like. Yeah, so this one right here, we'd rewrite it on one line like that, and that would be fine. Yep. So that is the same thing. So all of these could be rewritten as one line. So that's one of the major advantages to using an arrow function. I was writing them out on multiple blocks just because when you're first learning it, it's a lot of new syntax, and so it's going to take some time for it to sink in and for this to become really comfortable. So, you might feel like your hands are tied at first, or you might not even know where to begin. So anyway, just do your best. If you need to, write it in ES5 the way you're used to, and then try to translate it to ES6. So that can be an effective method as well, just because you're probably a little more, you're certainly more comfortable with ES5 right now than you are with ES6. So with these problems, that could be an effective approach as well, is to like write it in ES5 and then convert it to ES6. So if you just find yourself totally stuck, you don't even know where to begin, just do that. Because all the ES5 stuff works in the ES6 files. Like it all works. Like you don't have to change anything to make it like work all of a sudden. It's not like it's a different language. It's like ES6 is a layer on top of ES5. So it's just like a bunch of new stuff works now, but the old stuff all still works. Okay, so if we come in and look at each, and you can look at like _js.org to see it. And many of these functions, I don't have as strict of requirements as they do. That's why it says like based off of, like these functions. So you can go and look at _js to try to understand better like what the problem is. But it's, anyway, so it's based off of, because it's just my requirements are a little simple, a little more simple on some of it. So. Okay, so each. So the very first problem in this array file is the function each. So we see here we have const each, and then it's equal to this arrow function. As a quick note, down on the bottom, all the functions are being exported. This is a node thing. This makes it so I can access these functions from inside of the test files. So like an array tests, like the first one, this right here was the block of tests for each. And so there's some JS stuff that's all in here, but it's grabbing the each function out of that file. So again, like sometimes it can be helpful to go in and look at the tests and see exactly what I am testing for. So that can be something good to go in and to take a look at. So if you're like totally lost on a test or it's confusing, feel free to come in here and like take a look at the test. Don't change anything, just because like then it could like be buggy and not behave the way that you think it would. But feel free to come and look at the tests to see how to like, kind of like think backwards on it. So that can be an effective thing to do as well. So there's nothing like, you're not cheating if you're like looking at the tests. Like it's not, it's just, then you can just see like exactly why your code is failing and what you need to change about your function. So, all right, so with each. So what we're writing is a function that is going to iterate over elements. We're calling it elements because it's just going to be an array of something. And then we are going to pass those items one by one into the callback function. So we're given a callback function. So what this will look like, and I'll give this first problem to you, is I'm going to create a for loop. So let I get 0, I less than elements.length, I++. So right here I just create a simple for loop. And then and again, this is something that you're just going to have to like memorize. You're going to be typing this a lot. Let I get 0, I less than elements.length, I++. This is how you iterate over an array. Very, 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 very common task. You're like 90% of the time you're looping, you're iterating. You're iterating over an array from left to right. So what this is doing, we define an I variable, we set it to 0, and then we're saying as long as this statement is true, then continue to loop. And then do this after each cycle of the loop. So I starts at 0. We check is 0 less than the length of the array. So if the length was 5, then it would be is 1 less than 5? Yes. So then it's going to loop. And then at the end of it, we're going to change I from 0 to 1. We're going to say is 1 less than 5? Yep. So we run again. Increment I. So is 2 less than 5? Yep. 3 less than 5? 4 less than 5? And then when we get to 5, it's going to say is 5 less than 5? It's not. And so then the for loop will finish executing and move on. So those are the basics of what's going on in the for loop. You could also implement this with a for each if you would like, but it's kind of cheating because that's like what we're doing is like rebuilding the for each array for each method. But if you don't know what the for each method is, we're going to go over it later, so don't get stressed out. If I'm talking and there's like words that you're not understanding, I'm using a lot of vocabulary. Don't be stressed out about it. Just like, write it down. Maybe write down the words you don't understand. And like message me about it. But we're going to be, again, it's we're going to be going into a lot of this stuff, as we go along. So, okay, questions, semicolons. All right, I'll go into that in just a minute. So, okay, so I'll finish this example, and then I'll go in, and I see a couple questions piled up. I had a window covering the Slack channel. So, okay. All right, so now inside of here, we're just going to take CB, and then so yielding each in turn to the CB function. So what we're going to do is we're going to call the callback function, and then inside of it, we're going to pass in elements at index I. So as this runs over, it's going to pass that in. So yeah, so it's going to yield each. Often, too, they'll want the index as a second argument. I can't remember if the tests check for that. I don't think they do. No, they don't. Oh, wait. Oh, yeah, so one of the tests does tell you should pass the element and the index to the callback. So yeah, so you do need the index right there. So, okay. All right, so we essentially what this is doing is this is like a helper function. So what this means is that later on in the code, someone could say, so if you have this function defined, you could just say, all right, so I'm going to do each, and then I'm going to give it an array. This is me just defining an array in line, and then I'm going to define a function like this, and then I'm going to say, all right, let's we're going to get the value. And then we're going to, console.log, value times 5 or something like that. And so it's going to multiply every value by 5. And so this right here is, it makes it so you don't have to write out all of this for loop stuff, or you don't have to concern yourself with writing out the details of a for loop every single time. You can just type each, give it an array, and then give it a function. And then this function is going to be called, with the 1. So the value will be 1, the function gets called once. It gets called a second time, and 2 gets passed in. It gets called a third time, and 3 is passed in. It gets called a fourth time, 4 is passed in. It gets called a fifth time, and the 5 is passed in. So it's like this function is going to handle each item inside of the array one by one from left to right. And that's what's going on inside of here, is we're creating kind of a little helper method so that way we don't have to write our own for loops. And so this is all baked into underscore. But we're rebuilding some of that so you guys can flex your muscles a little bit and get used to some of these more basic, I guess, like JavaScript like tasks. So some of the other ones are like map, reduce, find, filter, flatten. Yeah, so these are all very, very common types of actions that you'd want to perform on a collection. So again, elements, just assume these are all arrays inside of the array file. The objects file is doing the same thing. They're common functions that work off of objects. Some of them are going to return. Some of them are going to use a callback function. So anyway, some of them will be a little bit different. So that way you can like see both. Okay. Something else to know too is these are not necessarily going in difficulty order. So, well, like in the file generally it is, but so like flatten right here is probably harder or will be more challenging than a lot of these basic object ones. With closure, anyway, so it's just, so it's not like, so if you get through a couple array problems and you're just like, and you want to change, like you can jump to the objects file. You don't necessarily have to complete them all in like sequential order. So feel free to jump around a little bit. Yeah, so it's kind of showing you how the functions are expected to be used. And yeah, so this is just a lot of good programming stuff that we're going to be doing this week. Just getting you guys up to speed with JavaScript, so then we don't have to, like we'll constantly be improving it and reviewing and iterating on it. But as we're going forward, you know, we need you guys to be in a really solid place with JavaScript before we dive into React, like client application development and backend application development. And we need to get this down really good. So this week is all like, we're starting at a pretty high level, but I know some of you, like, you know, may not be as experienced with JavaScript, and so like, don't worry, like everyone's kind of in their own spot. And so we'll do our best to just lift you all up to get you to the spot that we need. Like some of you will probably blow through this really fast. Others, it might, you know, you might not finish it, you know, or, you know, maybe only get partway through it. That's fine. It's our purpose this week is just to help every single person get a lot better at JavaScript, get you all up to a really, really solid level, so then we can like dive in. Like honestly, there will be assignments later on in the course where you're going to come back to this like in a couple months and then like try to redo this all from scratch in like memory without referencing your previous code. There's just a lot of really good, just general practice, like problems to like work through. And so, all right, I'm going to walk through some questions now. So, all right, so can I use F1? Let's see the thread. So, okay, so F1 equals arrow function high and then modify F1 later. Yeah, yep, you can. So you could write it just like that. The one thing, so the Zoom, the recordings, they're gonna be saved to my computer and then I'm gonna upload them to YouTube. And so we don't do the YouTube like live streaming just because it's better to be in a call like this and you know, I can see you guys and ask you questions and interact a little bit better, and all that gets recorded. So yeah, so Zoom is just going to be recorded, and then we're going to go and anyway, so that'll just be uploaded to an unlisted link on YouTube. So like you won't be able to find it if you go to our channel. It's like no one. It's like kind of hidden, but if you have the URL, you can go to it. And so then I'll post the URL for you guys. Okay, so Sarah, I want to go back and just revisit that example just real quick. So just to answer the question real quick, you guys all saw that in Slack. So yeah, so you could write var if you wanted to, you know, like to keep it a little simple. Just remember, if you put curly braces, nothing is implicitly returned. So it does not add a return statement right there. And so I just want to just be clear that. So if you had something like this and you were intending it just to return the string high, it actually would not return. You would have to get rid of the curly braces. So the curly braces mean that we're going to have like a full block and multiple lines. But if you just have one line in your function, then you can just write it like this. So that's just the one thing that I wanted to make the distinction on. And then, yeah, if you wanted to go back and change it, then you just do that to const. But yeah, so when you're writing your code, so for example, in here, first time you go through it, maybe you just say, all right, I'm just going to write a for loop like I know how to do it, you know, and use the var keyword, you know, and then at the end, you'll look at it and you'll be like, oh, all I have to do is just switch that to let. That's the only difference. So a lot of the time, there's only minor differences that come from the ES6 code. Most of them are just shortcuts. So it's pretty easy to go back in and optimize it. So, okay. All right, so yeah, and then the screencast recordings are not live, so you can't like rewind and go back. So that's why it's important for you guys to be here on time. But then, you know, you'll have some chance to let it sink in. You'll be able to apply it more later. Okay, so semicolons. What are so are semicolons optional when writing with one line? So if it's on one line, so if the function's on a single line, you should have. So general rule of thumb is if there is an equal sign, a return, or an operator like that, you know, like these are the operators. You know, general rule of thumb is if you have one of these things on a line, then you're going to need a semicolon at the end of it. So, so for example, const foo. You know, if I define a function, because I use an equal sign right here, I need to put a semicolon. And again, like you need to put a semicolon. Some people that write JavaScript, they don't use any semicolons because it doesn't really break anything. There can be times where it's argued that it's clearer to read and easier to understand, and it prevents like some weird like kind of like syntax and stuff from occurring from like the way you write your code. But they don't really break anything in JavaScript. So some people say yeah, some people say don't use them. I would say use them right now. Later on, if you would like, you can totally get rid of semicolons, and then the key is just be totally 100% consistent. So if you actually, there's a library we're going to use later, but so React router, and if I go into their training and they talk about it, this is a thing we're going to use later when we get into React, but they do not use a single semicolon. And well, okay, so they have it right here. So I'm not sure. This is just, I'm not sure what the reasoning is behind it. But this is like a library used by so many people, and then they, they leave like semicolons off and stuff. And I think it's more just like function invocations. They don't put semicolons. But oh yeah, so function invocations are the other ones where you should put a semicolon on the end. Because this is an expression, it's going to evaluate it. It's going to, there's some work to be done there. So yeah, so equal signs. Yeah, so just that's the linter will get after you for leaving off semicolons. So yeah, so you'll find out very quickly where your semicolons need to be. All right. Let's see. Yeah, so yeah, you can keep like your, yeah, it's like C++ is one of those where you leave the semicolon off and everything breaks. But JavaScript will not. The linter will get mad at you. But oh yeah, so last thing I want to cover, if we do, the linter is based off of the style guide. That's what I meant. Okay, so the Airbnb JavaScript style guide. This is the style guide that they use at their company, and there's actually a pretty widely used one because they have like 54,000 stars on it. Lots of people use this style guide, which is very well thought out. And our linter is implementing their style guide. I've turned off some rules that just aren't very good for our homework because our homework has a lot of code in an incomplete state and stuff like that. So I've like disabled a few things, and there's a couple things that are like super picky that are just I don't want you guys worrying about right now. But this explains it. So if you have a question about why the linter doesn't like something, you can go there, and then it explains it all down below. So you can actually even search the error. So if the linter breaks, you'll see an error in your console. You can grab that specific error and do a page search on here, find it, and it will explain, and they'll show good and bad examples, and they'll and then they give a reason for it. And so this is really good too. This helps you to understand like the reasoning behind behind the strictness. Okay. Linter will get mad at you for leaving one npm test not pass if the linter gives us the syntax errors. Yes, yeah, so it all breaks. So the linter will cause everything to fail. So let me show you an example. So so here's Atom, I have it up, here's the code. So if I pull up terminal, just pushed up some changes. So all right, so if I run npm test, and there might even be a linter error from something I left in. Nope. Okay. All right. So here are all the tests. They're all failing. So we see here like arrays. It shows those are all the different array tests that are failing. Let's see. Okay. All right. So so right now. Okay, so the tests are all failing, but before that, if I were to come in and this should do it. So I got rid of the semicolon, and you see this thing here that pops up, and it says error missing semicolon, and then you can look at the path, and it says advanced JavaScript source arrays.js, and then line 9, column 2. So I can come to line 9, column 2, and it's saying there should be a semicolon there. So I put it back, save it, then go back, and then now my tests are running. So now if I come in, let's say for let I get 0, I less than elements.length, I plus, and then we're going to go callback elements I, and then I like that. So save it, come back here in the terminal, run the tests, and now it's going to iterate through, and then now we see tests 2 passed. So come back up, we look at each, and then we see these green check marks, and then we see that those tests are passing. So that's the flow of the assignment. You're going to work through and get all of these little red X's to turn into green check marks. So, all right. Okay, so clone down the, so go to the assignment, so fork, clone, and then I would like you to do, well, ignore the README. So in the README, I gave a suggested order to the problems. I would like you guys to start with the arrays file. We'll do the ES6 one later because there's some more shortcuts and things that we're going to cover after lunch. So we're going to start that. We're going to work on this for a little bit. Your lunch is in 18 minutes, and so you'll have an hour. So that'll go from noon to 1, and then we'll come back after that, and then yeah, just go through the afternoon. So for the rest of the afternoon today, it's going to be a mix of project time and then me jumping on, and we're going to do a few more lectures through the afternoon to cover some other concepts. So we're going to go over closure. We're going to talk about recursion, and then we need to talk about some stuff that has to do with this, as well as some different ES6 features. So it's kind of a lot, but we're going to add it in, get these different videos uploaded, and then yeah, go from there. All right, so I'll be here. So what we'll do is we'll jump off the video call, and then you guys can ask questions in Slack. You can message me directly. You know, feel free to message Austin, and then we will yeah, go from there. So announcements and stuff will be put into the channel in Slack. Plan on a lecture right after lunch. So right now it's kind of 15 minutes to get the project down, play with it, get things up and going, get things set on your system, and then we'll go to break lunch for an hour. When you get back, then we're going to dive in and continue to work on or go over some other material. Okay. All right. Thanks everyone. I'll upload the video right now and then get that link to you. Thanks.